Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, we'll discuss about use case 3 of screen flows, right? So we've covered two use cases, pretty straightforward ones. And now let's uh, take it up a notch, maybe, right? In this use case, let's take a look at the question. When the user clicks on the create task button on the contact record, confirm what should be the subject, the due date, the description of the task. Once user enters all the details, create a task and assign it to the contact record owner with all the details that have been entered by the user, right? So what is our first hint? The first hint is that the button should be on the contact record page. What are the objects involved? The object is contact, which would be the parent, and then second is the object task, which is something that we need to create from our flow. We need to automate a record creation, right? We need to commit a transaction into the database to create a task and associate it, or rather assign it to the contact owner. Okay, so let's get started with this. So I'm on my Salesforce org and we have our first two use cases. Let's now create a new flow. And since this also involves or requires user input, right? The subject, the description, and the due date is something that the user will enter. So we want to create a screen flow because user input is required. So I'll just choose screen flow here, say create. Okay, we are pretty familiar with this interface now. I'll just go ahead and create a new screen. Okay, let's give it a header. I mean the label of the header. Accept task inputs. All right, and then on the footer, let's just say that I don't want to see the previous button and I don't want to see the pause button, and I just want to say create my task. All right, cool, great. I have the screen. I'll just say done. I'll say save. I'll say create task for contact owner, right? I need to follow my naming convention. Use case 3 screen flow create task. Okay, let's get rid of this API name and refill the API name automatically. All right, let's say save. Okay, I'll simply activate it and I'll just create a button on the contact record page so that that setup is done, and then we'll start working on the flow. So let's go to contact. Let's go to buttons, links, and actions. New action. Open it in Classic. This is a Safari browser problem, nothing to do with Salesforce. I'll choose a flow, and this time it should be use case 3. And I don't want a standard label. I'll just say create task. Okay, this can be done by a global action. I understand, I agree, but I'm just trying to show you a use case wherein how to create a record from a flow, right? That's the use case. That's the reason I'm doing this use case. Okay, we have created the button. Let's go to contact. Let's go to page layouts and add the button to the layout. Okay, so here we'll go to mobile and lightning actions and I'll say create task. This is my button. I'll just get this guy down here and say save. Okay, let's go to the contact tab and let's open a contact record. Right, let's say all contacts and let's open Brian Dent and let's see that the button is here. If I click on the create task button, it opens up a flow, but there's nothing. I'll just say create my task and it closes. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to actually create a task, associate that task with this contact, and also assign the task to the contact owner. Okay, that person would be the owner of the task. Let's get started to do that. All right, let's say accept task inputs is our screen, and what we want to do is we want to first ensure that we have the record ID of the contact, right? Because we want to associate it to the record. So the very first thing I always do is check if I need the record ID. I'll just go ahead and simply create it. So I'll just close the screen. I'll just go to the elements toolbar box, new resource variable. By now you should be doing this as fast as me, right? Data type should be record, or I can just call it text, and there should not be a default value. I'll say available for input. I'm just putting it text because I just need the record ID. Oh, I also need the record owner, right? So let's say record. Okay, I'll just choose record and I'll say this should be the contact record. available for input, and I'll say done. All right. Now I have the record ID variable, a record variable that will store the record ID as well as the owner of the record, so that I can use that for assignment. Right. Now, how do you create a record? When you click on this plus icon, there's an option that's called create records. This is what you use. Okay. So if you see, this comes under the section of data. So you can create, you can update, you can get, you can delete. You can do rollback also. All five operations are available similar to how you have it on triggers. Right? So we'll be looking at create records right now. Create Salesforce records using values from the flow. This is what we want to do. But before that, I want to ensure that the user inputs the values and those inputs are taken into consideration and a task record is created out of it. Right? So I'll just go to the screen and I want to take input from the user. So if you see, I have a lot of input options available here. Right? I can go ahead and start using it. Let's say, what do I need? I need a date field, which is the due date. I need a description field. Let's take a look at the use case. Description field, which would be a text area, I believe, and a subject. Right? So these are the three things I need. So the subject can be a text field. So let's choose a text field. So this is the first time we are looking at the input options here, right? What is the next thing? The date, the due date. So let's take a look at a date field, date input. I'll just take this guy here and put it here. Drag and drop. What's the third thing? A long text area. So I'll just take long text area and put it here. Now, when I click on each one of them, remember we can do component visibility. This is something we discussed, right, in the last use case. Remember that. And now we have these three fields. Now let's start setting this up. So for this one, what should be the label? It should be subject. Okay, it says subject now. I don't need a default value, but I want it to be required because I want it to be mandatory. This is something I need for a task to be created, right? So I'll just mark it mandatory. Same is with the due date. So I'll just say due date and I'll say require. This require check ensures that there's a validation that makes sure that the person or user using the flow enters the value before jumping into the next screen. And the third one is description, right? So description is also something that I may or may not require, so I'll just leave it as is. Okay, great. I have the three fields and I can say done now. Right? Now that I have taken the three fields from the user, there are two more fields that we need from behind the scenes that I don't want the user to enter. What? The first one is the contact association. I have the record ID for that, right? This record ID. And the second is the owner, the assigned to person. Who should it be assigned to? That would also come from the contact record, this record ID variable. I'll pick the owner from here. Now let's tag these five elements and create a task record. So I'll just click on this button here and I'll say create records. Okay, I want to create a task record. So create task under a contact. All right, that's my label. And how many records do I want to create? Do I want to create one or multiple? If I want to create one, it tells me whether I want to use values from a specific record, and it tells me just use that particular record variable. Okay, or else you can choose separate resources and you can tell the flow that this is the particular object I want to work on, and when I choose the object, it tells what fields do I want to set. Okay, so there are two things, just understand this. First, use all values from a record, right? Similar to how we have a record variable here, you could also create a new record variable, assign all of the elements that you got here to that variable, and use that variable to create a record here. Did not make sense? That's okay. We'll look into it in a while. Okay. But for now, we'll take a look at the second option wherein I will say use separate resources and literal values. Why separate resources? Because I have taken three separate resources here as input and I want to use each one of them to tag to a specific field on the task object. Okay. So I'll do that. I'll say use separate and I'll say here task. This is the object that I want to create a record for, and now it prompts me choose which field do you want to populate. Okay, so if you look here, I'll get the subject option available, I'll get the description available, I'll get the due date available, right? So these are the three things I wanted from the user's input, and then there were two more things. What were the two more things? Who is the person associated, right? And then the last thing is who would be the owner, who would this task be assigned to. Those are the five things we need to create a task. Is that correct? Yes, it's correct. Now, what should be the value of the subject? The value of the subject should be the value I picked up from this particular screen from the user. So I need to copy this API name and then paste it here. As simple as that. This is the value. See, screen component subject. it comes as a merge field because whatever is the value that the user input on the subject text is stored in this particular variable. What about description? I named it description, right? So I'll just choose the description component and this will come as a merge field again. Same with the due date. So I'll just choose the due date field here. See, due underscore date. Do you want to confirm? Let's confirm. See, if I go here and I choose the due date, see, this is the API name. So it's picking the variable, the API name, and it's holding that value. Okay. What are the remaining two things? The who ID should be the record ID, the record ID of the contact record, correct? So I've just chosen the record ID dot ID. Okay, it's not showing here, but I just leave it here so it pops up as record ID contact ID. All right, this is the unique 18 digit or 15 digit record ID of every record. So that's the lookup reference. And then the user lookup is what I need again. That would be the contact records owner. So I'll type record ID dot owner ID, right? Take a moment here, understand how I map the values. If you have to, just rewind or go back probably 2 minutes and then rewatch this section. Okay, it's straightforward. I might have gone a bit fast, I might have gone a bit slow for some people, but take a look at it one more time if you have to, and then come back here and we'll continue. Okay, so we have a task object record created here, and we have assigned all the values that we captured from the screen and from the from behind the scenes, and we have tagged them to the right fields. Okay, why did I choose who ID here and why did I not choose what ID here? Because what ID is for objects, basically things that are not actual entities, and who ID is for things which are actual, which are living. So what ID would be would be accounts and opportunities, because they are what, they don't actually exist. An organization is not a real thing, it's a man-made thing, right? But what about a who ID? A who ID is someone you need to refer to. So a contact is a person, right? A lead is a person. So who ID comes in the picture when you want to refer to contacts or lead. So I want to associate a contact record here, which is why I've tagged the who ID instead of the what ID. If I were creating a task record under an opportunity, I would not tag the who ID. I would tag the what ID and I would put the opportunity record there. Make sense? Great. So now that I have the create node created, I'll just close this and I'll say save as, save, and I'll activate it. Let's take a look at how things look in our screen. So I've activated, the flow is activated without any errors, so we are good. Let's go here and let's refresh. Okay, let's click on the create task button. So you see I have three inputs. Very cool. How long would it take to create a Lightning Web component to do this? It would take a bit more time, right? Would you be able to do this by Apex and Apex triggers? No. Would you be able to get such clean and smooth auto adjusted Salesforce design oriented responsive design in Visual Force pages? No. So you see how flows come in handy in these kind of situations. And then you have the label here, create task. Okay, let's start putting in the subject. So I want to say follow up. I want to put a date here. If you notice that every field has a data type, right? So this one is a text area. See, it expands similar to how a text area behaves. This is a date picker. So you have a date picker here. So I'll choose a date and then I'll say, okay, so I'll just give in a description here. All right. And I'll simply say create my task. So if you notice now, I have created a task, and do you see something showing up here? See, a task record has been created, right? And this is something that's currently due. It has a description that we added, and it is due for 12 December, the date that we picked, right? How do you notice, how do you know that this is associated to this record? Because it showed in the related list. See, it is associated to a contact named Brian Dent, and it is assigned to the contact record owner, which is Himanshu. Okay, so see how everything is populated. If we wanted to populate the status field, we could have populated that as well. Okay, nice. We have been able to create a new record from a flow without doing much, right? Very nice. Let's click on the create task button again, and if I click on the create my task button here, let's see what happens. You see the input validations that we put on the flow, that these two fields are required, actually work, and they don't go ahead and try to create a task. Okay, so I'll say follow up to, and due date is 15th. Okay, I'll just say follow up again. Follow up to does not make sense. I'll just say If they don't, or let's not put the description this time. Let's see what happens because these two are required, right? Let's create my task. So you see, a follow-up again task has been created. It does not have a description, but it is again associated to Brian Dent, has a due date, has a subject, and is assigned to the record owner. Fancy? Great. So we are able to create a task record. Now let's go back to our screen flow and understand what we did. We created a screen. We took three input variables, three input elements from our flow out of all the standard ones available. So you understand now, right? If you have to take a currency, you can take a currency. If you want to take time input, you can take time input. If you need email, you can take email. And all those inputs will adhere to the data type validations that come with it. So a date picker will let you pick a date by giving you the option of a date picker, right? It would not be a text field, right? Same with long text area and same with all other data types that you have here. Cool. It's very easy to just drag and drop and just use those. You just need to ensure that you put a relevant API name and you use that API name to use that value or reference that value wherever you want to reference, the way we did it on the create task button here, right? We also did some component validation. Correct, we made sure that some fields are required and some are not, so that we are able to create a task. What happens if a task is created without a due date, right? A due date is a mandatory field on a task record, so you cannot create a record that will fail, right? So if it fails, the flow will fail. It will give you an unreadable, more like a not user friendly error, which is not good, right? So we need to ensure that we have all areas covered. Okay, so if we are just taking three inputs from the user, we need to ensure, oh, what else do I need to fill in for this record to be created, right? That's why we associated it to a contact and also assigned it to a user. We did that behind the scenes. The user did not input anything. Correct. Great. Now let's take a look at something else. I wanted to talk about these three fields holding these values, right? Remember, we looked at this create task button, the create task screen, wherein I told you that let's go with the second option, which says I have three separate resources: subject, description, due date, which is why I want to use the three different values and I just want to choose an object. What if we chose the use all values from a record option? That tells you that you can choose an entire record. If you are a Salesforce developer by any chance, like if you are someone who's a Salesforce developer and is learning flows, that's awesome. But how do you instantiate a variable? How do you instantiate a contact record variable to create a test record? You say contact con equal to new contact, and then you say con dot last name equal to Himanshu, con dot first name equal to blah blah blah, con dot account ID equal to something, and then you say insert con record, right? What do you use to insert? You use to use the instance that you created, right? The con record variable. What is that? That is essentially a record variable, which is the same thing here. So you can create a record and then you can put in the entities and the parameters that you want to put it in and fill it with, and then you can simply say the flow that take this entire record and just create it for me. It has all the things you need. How would you do that? Let's try that out. So in order to create a record variable, if you notice, we just have a record ID variable, which is what? Which is the contact record variable. We cannot use that here. Why? We want to create a task record. So I'll create a new resource. Okay. And here I'll say this will be another variable and I'll say task to create. This is my API name. Okay. And this would be of data type what? Record, because this is going to hold a task record. And see, you get to choose which object should it be. So I'll say task and I'll say this is available for input, or you don't even need to say available for input because this is something that we are using internally in the flow, so you don't need to define everything as available for input or output. Okay. Now, do I want to create one record or multiple? If I want to create one, I'll just leave it as is, but if I want to create multiple records, I would want a list. Correct. I would want a list. So if I want a list, I would need to check this box here. Then this makes this a list variable, not a single variable. Okay. Right now we'll work on single variable. So this is the task to create and I'll say done. So I've created a task to create a record and I've just associated it here. Let's go ahead and save it and let's see what happens. If I say save, I say activate. So I've associated a record variable and I've said that create a task with this variable. Okay. And now let's come here and say refresh. Do you think this will work? Yes, no? What do you think? What's your first thought? Let's see what happens. If I click on the create task button and if I fill in the details, and I say create my task, you see nothing happens. But is a task created? No, a task is also not created, right? Now, why is that? Firstly, is a task created? And secondly, if it is created, why is it not associated to this contact? So to verify these two things, let's go to the task object. Okay, and if I take a look at today's tasks, you see there's nothing here. Or let's look at probably all tasks, right? Recently viewed. So there's call, there's follow up again. What is this call? This is assigned to some text queue. This is not one. This is not the one, right? Because this was created on 25 of October, the 25th of October. It's not the one, which means our task has not even been created. But why did it not get created? I associated the record variable here. The reason is I created a variable, but did I assign the attributes, the identity attributes that it needs to create the variable? Did I tell that this task to record, that the task to create record should have this owner ID, should have this subject, should have this description? No, I did not do that. So I need to do that, and that is when the task will be created. Okay, so what I need to do before setting this here on the create records is assign the attributes that I have taken from the user input to this particular variable. How do you do that? So you use something that's called an assignment. Okay, so you use this assignment and you say assign user inputs to record variable. Make sense? What I'll do here is I'll say which record variable do I need to work on? Sorry, which record variable do I need to work on? I need to work on the task to create. Now, do I have a specific field I want to set? I want to set the subject field. What should the subject field be? It should be the subject API name that I have taken from the screen from the user. What about the description? Do I have a description? Yeah, I may or may not. So if I have it, do I tag it to the description field? Yes, I do that. So I tag it here. What about the due date? I do the same for due date. Right now, what are those two background activities we had to do? One was task to create dot um, who ID, which is associating it with the contact. I'll just say record ID. See how dynamic it is. I'm able to choose the contact ID here. So it should be somewhere here, I believe. Contact ID, it shows up, but it's not. Let's just say dot ID and then task to create assigned to, right? Who should it be assigned to? And this should be assigned to the owner of the record, the contact record. So you see, what I've done is I've created an empty box. I've called it that you are task. You are a task record. Okay. Now the task record is currently empty. It started asking me, Himanshu, I am a box. You have called me a task. What is my subject? So I gave them a subject. What is my description? I gave it a description. And I gave all the important variables that uniquely identify or define that task. Now that box is ready to be created. So I just throw the box to the database system. And there, the database system catches it and sees, okay, a task record has come, a box has come, that is a task type, and it has this subject, this description, this is the person who it needs to be assigned to, this is the owner, this is the contact, and this is the due date. Okay, system, can we look whether these values are correct? Yeah, they are correct. Is this all I need to create a task? Yes, it's all you need to create a task. Okay, go ahead and create a task. And when we click on the done button here, that is exactly what will happen. Make sense? So the first method and the second method do the same thing. It's just that you are using a record variable here, and there you are using the literal values literally on an iteration, right? You are just trying to assign each literal value to a resource, and you created one record in the create task button itself. Okay, both methods are fine. It's just that, depends on what variable or what kind of variable do you need, and depends on the use case, whether you need it for something else, or you want to create it uh, uh, multiple records. If you want to create, so you would go with this particular approach. If you want to create just one, you might go with the first approach, right? So I've created this and I've said that when you create a task, choose my box that I've created for you. Okay. So I'll say save as, save. So this saved up fine, activate. Now let's see if I refresh what happens. So I've just refreshed my page and there are these two tasks. And if I say view more, there's nothing else. If I say create task now, I'll say follow up last time. The due date should be somewhere in the future, and I'll say, okay, let's say create my task. Fingers crossed, it's taking some time. What happened? A new task got created. Fancy? So the follow-up last time task has been created, and if I click on this particular task, I see that my description is here, and everything that I did the other way is also here in this way, right? So both methods are fine, depends on the use case that you're working on and how you want to work on. If you want to insert multiple records, you would want to go with the record variable concept. If you want to create just one record, you would go with the previous approach. None of them is wrong, both of them are fine until it works, right? It should work. That's the end goal. All right, nice. We learned assignments here. We learned how to create records. So you should be good with some data related operations now. You should be able to take inputs from the user and store it in your variables, right? You can do that as well. We learned how to ensure requiredness of a field, right? We use the required check when we were choosing the input variable. Okay, so we have done all of that. That completes our use case, and now we come to what you need to do. So there are two challenges, right? The first challenge is that the user should not enter a due date in the past. You see that we have a due date variable here, right? So if I click on this button and if I say create task, what happens here? The due date can be selected in the past. Now I don't want user to do that. Okay, I want them only to be able to do something that's in the future. So I have to stop them from entering something in the past. That's the first challenge. The second challenge is the length of the subject should not exceed 20 characters. Okay, since we are using a text field, this could have been a pick list. Try using a pick list, but since this is a text field, I don't want them to enter anything that's longer than 20 characters. These are the two validations that I want to put. I want to put these two restrictions so that my data is not incorrect. Data is fine. Okay. So these are the two challenges I would encourage you to do in the current flow that you have worked on. Try to look into things and see if you can figure it out, and pause the video here. Once you are done, come back. And if you're not able to do it, and if you want to continue right away, just take a look at this video. I'm just explaining right away. Okay. All right, the very first challenge is user should not enter a due date in the past. Now, how do I ensure that? If I go to this particular screen and if I click on each element, I have some options available here. So we looked into the set component visibility, right? Whether I want to hide or show a component is something that I can govern from here. But then you have something that's called validate input. Okay, so validate input is something that you can work on, and you can put a formula here, and if the formula does not execute as expected, it throws a error message. Okay, so what should be my error message? You have entered the date in the past. This should be the message. This should be shown in red, and this should be it. Okay, I'll just add a bold to it, and I'll put italics, and I'll put underline. I put everything. Okay, this is the error. Let's not put underline, does not look neat. Okay, this is the error. But what should be the formula? So here you can add the formula. If you see, you have options available as global variables here. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to ensure that they have entered a date that is beyond today's date. Correct, that's something that's beyond today's date. Okay, so what I can do is I can choose the variable which is due date, and I can say the value should be greater than today's date. See what I did here? I am saying that the due date that the user has picked up should be greater than the current date of the system. The flow variable is something that has some variables that we can use. So if you go to flow, you have the current date option. You can get the same thing, I believe, from the system variable also. If I say system, okay, it just has a date and time. So I have to go with the flow variable. So I'll choose this global variable and it'll say, give me the current date. Okay, so now if the user has entered a date, let's say that's 3rd of December. So 3rd of December is greater than 4th of December, true or false? It is false because it's not greater than the 4th of December. So it will throw the error. Okay, so just put this check here. Let's see if it works or not. All right, so I'll just go ahead and put that validation and I'll say done and I'll say save, save, and I'll activate. Okay, let's now refresh our page and let's see if the due date accepts anything that's behind the scenes, that's behind today's date. So if I choose something, let's say third, and I say create my task, it says that you have entered the date in the past. Right now this UI and this UI looks different, so what I'll do is I'll just try to keep it neat. Let's go back to the due date, validate input. I'll say do not put italics to it, and I'll say do not put bold to it. Just keep it the way the error is on the top. Okay, what did I do here? On the formula, I add the formula that should be sufficed for the error message not to be shown, right? Let me tell it the other way. Put the success formula here that the due date should be greater than current date. Okay. Do you want people to, put a date that's today's date and something in the future? Then you can simply say -1 here, right? You can do a bracket and you can do all your mathematical operations here. Okay. No worries. So it will now see whether the due date is greater than current date -1. Okay. This should not be -1. This should be greater than equal to, right? My bad. So this should be greater than equal to. So the due date should either be the same as current date or today's date when the flow is executing, or it should be more than the current date. It should not be anything behind. It cannot be yesterday, basically, or anything beyond that, right? That's the check. All right, so this will work. What about the subject? Now I want to ensure the other challenges, the length of the subject should not exceed 20 characters. Okay, so here if I go ahead and see validate input, I'll say the subject length cannot be more than 20 characters. Okay, now let's see how do we do that. If I just put the red color error here as well, I'll say done, and let's see if we are able to do this just by the formula itself or not. So what do I want to pick? I want to pick the subject variable that holds the value. Now the length, how do I calculate the length? The length should be greater than 20, correct? I'm sorry, it should be less than or equal to 20. That's the success criteria. If it is 21, then it should throw the error, correct? Now, how does it understand whether this is how do I calculate the length? So I can use probably a function that's called len. Let's see if it works or not. Okay, I've just put a len function similar to how we put it on what do you call them, formulas. We put it on process builders or workflows or even validation rules, right? When we create a validation rule, we are able to use this len function, right? Is this function available here? It is not available here, but let's see if it works or not. Okay, let's say done. Let's say save, and I'll say save. Okay, this got saved. Let's say activate. Let's refresh. And now let's say I put something that's beyond 20 characters. So I filled the field and I say create my task. So it says that the subject length cannot be more than 20 characters. All right. So even though that resource picker does not have those options available, but your standard operations, logical, text, advanced, and mathematical operations are available here to be used. The len function is available. So basically, anything that you can use on the validation rules, your normal validation rules, your standard or custom validation rules that you create can also be used here, more or less. Okay, so it's just that you would need to know the right function. So you can either take a look at the documentation, how to check the length. So it will tell you that, len is a function. Okay, so I just put that function here, right? So this is how you can add more validations on your forms, on your screen flow forms, so that user data is not corrupted and it is something that does not hamper your system. Your data is compliant, your data is correct. There's data correctness. All right. So these were the two simple challenges, and that ensured that we understand the validate input section. Okay, great. That's all about use case 3. I'll talk to you in the next use case, which would be use case 4. Thank you.